What's going on, everybody? Hour number 3 here, Pro Wrestling Experience on ChicagolandSportsRadio.com. Hope you guys enjoying the show. Want to thank Gunner for coming on the show earlier on today. And just going to do a little recap of Wrestling Wednesdays, take a look at what everybody's doing, having some fun. Also getting to recap what happened here on Chicago this past Monday night on Raw. We got another interview, folks, and glad and honored to have a former TNA World Heavyweight Champion on the line. We got Magnus. What's going on, man?
Hey, Josh, how are you?
Doing pretty good. How's things going down there in Florida?
I'm actually in Virginia right now.
Oh, you're in Virginia now?
Yeah, everything's good, and I'm getting ready to hit the gym after this interview, and then pack up and get ready for my first Global Force live event loop.
It's going to be in Appleton, Wisconsin, right?
Right, Appleton, Wisconsin, and then we're in Erie, PA, and then somewhere just out Lake County, Ohio.
Mm-hmm.
Just outside of Cleveland.
So basically, everybody should know by now you decided to part ways with TNA, but now you're part of Global Force Wrestling. We're going to take a look back at everything from the beginning and all that stuff. But basically, how excited are you? It's probably a fun time to be in the business right now, right?
Yeah, it really is. Like, there's a lot of great products, that are being put out there, and there's a lot of great new minds kind of behind the scenes in different areas and different aspects. There's more talent now than ever, and there's a lot of places outside of the big companies that are really starting to carve a niche in the genre and really do some great stuff here and overseas.
Now you're taking this next transition from one company to another. How would you describe your brand of wrestling to people that may have never seen you perform before?
Well, I'm very much a heavyweight, but also I would guess I would say I'm pretty dynamic. I'd probably describe my style as a dynamic heavyweight, as in the sense of I can brawl, I can wrestle and do the sort of traditional European style stuff if I need to. I can do a little bit of flying if the time is right, and I've tried to sort of be schooled in as many different areas as possible, but I'm pretty cerebral, I guess, would be a way to describe it. I try and, everything I do has to sort of try and make it make sense and be believable and try and tell stories in the ring. Mm-hmm.
So, you're making this transition to Global Force Wrestling. It's a new company, it's a startup. You had experience with Jeff in the past, but what are you looking forward to when it comes to these upcoming Global Force Wrestling shows?
Well, first and foremost, I'd say working with new talent. It goes without saying that, after 6.5 years with TNA, and and I'm very, very proud of those years, by the way. But I've worked with, virtually everybody there is to work with there, and some guys are no longer there. But I was very fortunate. I got to work with so many great talents that really helped me and allowed me to become a good talent. Like everybody from Samoa Joe to AJ Styles, to Doug Williams back in the day, Bobby Roode, James Storm, Sting, Booker T, Kurt Angle, like the list goes on and on. And now it's, the current roster at TNA is a much younger roster and sort of, that has, much less experience. Mm-hmm. And for me, it's like I'm looking to wrestle places where I can mix it up with good talent so that I can, showcase myself as the best I can. And, I'm looking forward to mixing it up with new, fresh, hungry talent, like this first loop, my first night I'm wrestling Tommaso Ciampa, which I know a lot of people are excited about seeing. And then I'm working a guy called Congo Kong, who I've heard a lot of good things about as well. So it's like, right off the bat, I'm excited to work with. I think there's just a lot of energy with Global. There's a lot of everybody there is like excited about it and wants to work hard and wants to be part of something. Rather than sort of be job scared or sort of bitter or upset about other things that are going on. Everyone here is like everyone wants to deliver and wants to be part of something new and exciting.
That sounds awesome, and I saw the promo clip on YouTube. So Global's having their tournament in Vegas when the TV tapings are starting. Is it like you don't know how many participants are in the tournament right now, right? But there is going to be a tournament to crown the Global Force champion.
I believe so. Yeah, that's what I'm aware of. Yeah.
Okay, that sounds cool. You know, you're talking about the roster. Is there anybody else that you know that's on there that you're already looking forward to work with?
Yeah, I think. I mean, I've been a big fan of PJ Black for a long time, and I hope I get to mix it up with him at some point. You know, going forward. And you know, Jeff's always had a very good eye for talent. You know, I love tag team wrestling, so you know, obviously the fact that Bullet Club are working with Global as well is very exciting. I have worked with Gallows quite a bit, and I love Gallows. I think he's great talent, and been a big fan of Carl Anderson for a long time, going back to his days, you know, tagging with Doug and stuff in Japan. So, you know, maybe the chance to do some tag team wrestling again with those guys, because I really enjoy tag team wrestling. It's a totally different sort of style of storytelling than singles, and I really love them both.
Let's go back from the beginning, and I know, obviously, coming from England, you know, getting some experience even before you even got to TNA. Talk to us about your motivation into getting into the wrestling business, and you don't regret the decision you made, right?
No, I mean, I guess that there are times where I question it, but I don't think I ever regret it. No, I grew up in a very sort of middle class, you know, rural kind of area of England, and you know, there wasn't a whole lot to do. You know, I was mad about sports. I played everything. You know, I played you know, soccer, rugby, you know, swam, tennis, you know, all this kind of stuff. And then, you know, I was a fan of wrestling when I was a small kid, but really sort of I just looked at it like a cartoon, you know. I was like, oh, cool, like, you know, Bret Hitman Hart and the British Bulldog and, you know, Shawn Michaels and The Undertaker. And then sort of around the sort of mid to late 90s, you know, as the sort of as that really sort of boom period of wrestling started to take shape, I just started looking at it in a different way. It coincided with me becoming a teenager, so I just saw that rebellious kind of, you know, and I just saw it as a way where you could be, I really liked sports, but I also really liked entertainment, and I never seemed to be sort of satisfied with just one or the other. I always wanted to be involved with something that allowed me to do both. And wrestling just seemed like the perfect fit because it was a way for me to sort of train and, you know, and think like an athlete and sort of apply myself in that way like I always had, but then also to be an entertainer and let that part of my personality out. So yeah, I broke in at 17 with the Knight family, who are well known now as the parents of Paige in WWE. You know, I broke in with them and you know, they were you know, they were a great place to be introduced to the business because they, you know, they pull no punches and they, you know, and they brought you in the right way. And then I started to slowly venture out around the country and got booked for Brian Dixon, who a lot of guys know as a very successful promoter in the UK, who guys like Daniel Bryan and lots of other American names have worked for in the past. And then after that, it was you know, before I knew it, I was like 18 or 19 years old, and I was a full-time wrestler. So it was, you know, and then that was pretty much that.
Did you get to like intertwine or work with the guys like McIntyre or Barrett or Sheamus before you got to the States?
Yeah, Wade Barrett and I actually went to the same school for a while. Nice. We had some of our very first matches with one another because we were two of the sort of larger guys in that out of that school, so we were often married, you know, as the two heavyweights. I knew of Sheamus, you know, because he was very well known and among like my generation of guys. Because I'm probably you know, a little younger than Sheamus and Wade. Like I'm 28, you know, and so by the time I sort of broke in, they were both in their mid-20s, kind of, you know, really starting to mature and develop. But Sheamus was always very well regarded by by my generation of guys as like a guy who really did well at like promoting himself and marketing himself. He was always, you know, getting media coverage and things of that nature. He's very, very smart, switched on guy. It's no surprise to me at all. He's had the success that he's had. And then Drew, I I would cross paths with him a lot, but during those days, Dixon was running so many shows that he had like a northern team and a southern team. And because Drew, obviously coming from Scotland, was always working the north and I was always working the south, so it would only be occasionally where he'd have these bigger shows where we'd all sort of meet and cross paths that I would see him. But I always saw how much talent he had, and again, he's another guy who, knew that he was going to go places.
Now, let's go back to the beginning of TNA and getting to do work with the British Invasion faction or trio and getting to work with Doug. How was that experience?
It was perfect. It was exactly what I needed at that time. I was very green. Was pretty comfortable on the microphone, but that was about it. And, needed somebody to help me through the mechanics of the work in the ring, because you don't just pick this stuff up overnight. And thankfully, Doug and I, we sort of complemented each other well, because Doug was so reliable in the ring. But needed someone to help him come out of his shell more as a personality, and that was me. And I had no problem on the personality front, but needed help in the ring. So it was a good marriage in that respect. And then we had Rob Terry too, who was, just such an awesome specimen that it was just a cool act. I thought it was a great little piece of business there for a while.
A lot of people talk about factions, and there's a lot of cool ones. And even for a TNA standpoint, from Aces and Eights a couple years ago, and also the stuff you got to do with Dixie 1 year the world champion. Do you think there'd be a time where we see another big foreign faction besides the Bullet Club?
There's always that possibility. I think TNA tried something called World Elite, which we were part of for a bit, which but it just seemed a bit too kind of haphazard. It didn't, I felt like it was good on paper, and then it just didn't quite, it just didn't quite click. That happens sometimes. Mm-hmm. I would say, there's definitely the opportunity for it. It needs the right guy to be the mouthpiece. It needs because it's all about the motivation for me, a good faction has to have a real motivation behind it. It has to have a real reason to be formed, rather than just these guys are all working together, and that's it. There needs to be a real definitive reason why they're all together. Whether they're elitist or whether they are, they all believe in the same cause, or and things like that. That to me is the essence of a good faction. Mm.
We're talking to Magnus, former TNA wrestler and now part of Global Force Wrestling. You can follow Magnus at Twitter at MagnusOfficial. Let's continue on here. We go from a British Invasion, now you're a single star, and then you get into work with Samoa Joe as a tag team, and you guys even became an IWGP Tag Team Champion out there. Talk about your time getting to work with Joe, and what did you learn getting to work with him side by side?
Well, anybody who's been in the ring with Joe knows just how talented he is, and knows just how much knowledge he really has. He's developed what I think is the best offensive move set, in wrestling today. Everything he does is believable, but he's so safe and so careful and so precise. It's really amazing for a guy with his physical characteristics. He's such a brilliant athlete, and I don't think people really, even now, even still to this day, don't really give him the credit for his athleticism that he really deserves. He's just brilliant. But also his mind, he has a great mind for psychology and for storytelling. He's just and for me, to be married with him, it was another situation where, our styles complemented each other, because Joe is a good promo. Joe's good on the mic, but he has a certain style that fits a certain situation very well, but then doesn't always work with every possible scenario. But then with me, I think it just gave us as an accent, as far as the promos and stuff were concerned, it gave us a bit more versatility. It gave us a bit more. We could be a bit more playful, or a bit more cocky, or we could be serious, or we could, it gave us a bit more range, and we just click. Sometimes there are things in wrestling where people just have chemistry, and that was just the case with Joe and I. There was no definitive plans for us, and we just we went out and had great chemistry, and it just worked, and the people bought it, and it was one of those things where you could just feel it and you could hear it with the people that they liked it, you know, and we enjoyed it too. I was such a fan of Joe's that it was just so easy for me because I already knew all his stuff so well. I just instinctively, you know, knew how to fit it together with mine and make something good.
Was there any particular tag team, even when you guys were working down in Japan or even in TNA, that brought the best out of you?
I really liked working with. We had some really good matches with Chris Daniels and Frankie Kazarian, who were called Bad Influence then. Now they're known as The Addiction in Ring of Honor. Like those two guys are, you know, very, very experienced, you know, veterans, and you know, and both of those guys sort of, you know, certainly at the forefront of a sort of new pioneering kind of style. But, you know, by the time we got to work with them, you know, obviously they had worked with Joe a million times, and I had even worked with them a fair bit by that point. So we all just clicked and told great stories with them as the sort of slightly kind of cowardly heels, you know, but who had great athletic moves, and then me and Joe as the sort of bulldozer, kind of super confident, baby-faced heavyweight. It was just a really fun story to tell, and we'd had some great matches all around the country with them.
Now, you know, now we go from the tag team, and we're getting to the World Championship thing. Before we get to that, obviously I've been a big fan of TNA for a long time, even from the beginning, and getting to see your run has been fantastic over the past couple of years. And I got to see you guys in Chicago after lockdown a couple of years ago. TNA hasn't come to Chicago that much, but do you have any favorite memories from the time you got to wrestle here?
I'm trying to remember what the I think the last time I think we were in Chicago was maybe for live TV.
Yeah.
I do remember that. I think it was wasn't that when we were doing the Main Event Mafia?
Oh, it wasn't the Mafia, but Aces and Eights were around, and then
okay, it was just before the. It must have been just before them. I do remember it because it was they were just actually was it. I think that was where we did like a 4-way match. With me, Joe, Jeff Hardy, and Kurt, right?
Yeah. That was the second show.
That. And that was a good show, I thought. I really enjoyed that match, too, because that was one of those situations where, for me personally, it was one of those things where it was like, okay, you've got Jeff Hardy, who's a massive star and just so popular, you know, with and has those just gets an incredible reaction everywhere he goes, and one of the last real draws that exists in the business. Mm-hmm. Kurt, who obviously really needs no introduction, you know, arguably the best in-ring performer of all time. You know, Joe, who was very, very well established and very well liked, especially in that Chicago market. And then there was me. And I remember thinking, like, God, like, I have to deliver here, otherwise I'm going to get gobbled up by this audience, you know, because I know that the Chicago fans are, you know, they like what they like. And I was like, I was ready for it. You know, I wasn't intimidated by it. I just was like, okay, well, you know, I've got to impress in this because I'm the sort of question mark in this match. You know what I mean? And I had a good showing, and just like I came out of that and I watched it back, and you know, and a few people went out of their way to come to me and say like, you look like you belonged in that group of people, and that meant a lot to me. That was a special night. That
definitely had to been a big proving ground moment. You got the Aces and Eights running around causing mayhem in every match, but you got a number one contenders match with four probably the best guys on the roster getting to tear down the house. Just a pure match. It really didn't have any major like storyline implications. So that was a big proving night for you, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. So let's get into the title reign. And you know, obviously, you still said you're still young in your career. You're not even 30 yet now, and you know, I'm curious for a guy from your standpoint, getting to be like younger in the business, and you're the world champion now, and you're representing TNA. Was the title reign you had at TNA everything you wanted it to be?
No, not really. I mean, it was, you know, there were circumstances out of my control that you know, that made it a little difficult from the beginning. Mm-hmm. And then just, you know, I can't really speak for them. I just know that, I guess you know, I feel like the problem with AJ's departure left such a left such a bad taste in the mouth of not only the fans but a lot of people within the company, that some of that kind of, you know, through no fault of my own, kind of rubbed up on me. You know, that's just my take on it. You know, that's just my feeling on it. You know, other people might have a different version of it. That's mine, and I'm sticking to it. And I just felt like it just created like a strange atmosphere, you know. And I was, you know, I had just turned 27. You know, I was still kind of maturing, and you know, I sort of felt this responsibility, you know, for AJ's departure, even though it had nothing to do with me, obviously. You know, and I was just doing what I was told, and it was like I just felt like I was put in a bit of an awkward spot, and then I sort of got scapegoated, and then they sort of made a knee-jerk reaction based on, you know, I think because they thought Eric Young was going to have a lot of, you know, mainstream sort of media attention, so they sort of thought that would be a good opportunity for them, and that's my understanding of it again, and I just kind of went, okay, if that's what you want, and honestly, by that point, I was just happy to get out of it, because it was just it like every week I would show up to work and there would be some kind of new sort of big issue that, you know, that was supposedly going on, and I just kind of got to a point where I just felt like the people who were running the, you know, who were running the ship at that time were just a little, you know, they were just spinning their wheels in a lot of different directions. They didn't really know what they wanted, and I just kind of went, well, in a way, I was just sort of grateful to be away from it all, because I just wanted to deliver and be a good performer, and all I wanted was a chance to prove that I could be the top guy, and I'm not sure I ever really got that chance. I think I got those chances before I became the top guy, and then once I got the title, I sort of felt like I was just constantly having to like make chicken salad, you know, rather than to actually just prove, you know, rather than just go out and just tell great stories and, you know, do what I had essentially been doing before I won the title.
True. And, you know, it's like you're talking about you wanted to, for better reasons, but now as we're moving on towards a new phase in your career, what do you want? What is your goals in the next couple years?
I have always been, you know, and then not a lot of people know this about me, but I've always been, you know, I've always been very interested in the entrepreneurial side of the business and of life. You know, I'm fortunate that, you know, my career with TNA up to this point has sort of put me in a position where financially I'm able to sort of have a few different options, and that's going to be more of where I apply a lot of my focus in, you know, in the current scheme of things. Like, I really want, as a wrestler, just as a performer, I just want to have fun and enjoy what I'm doing and continue to make a living from it, you know, and then outside of the business, and then some of it will also sort of cross over with the business. I want to explore more of my entrepreneurial sort of endeavors. And that desire is one of the reasons why I decided to get on board with Jeff and his new venture, because believe me, you know, it's not at this point, not necessarily the most financially rewarding decision for me, but it's the opportunity to be a part of something new and to be involved in a startup and to, you know, and be able to have the opportunities afforded to me by Jeff to explore some of my own, you know, entrepreneurial interests, and you'll start to see that in the coming weeks. We've got some really exciting stuff coming up. So yeah, I'm very excited about that.